How does a son's life in a mental health asylum affect his mother and father? I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. It is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about an interesting short story from an author that I've talked about before. Today's short story is all about mental health and unfortunate life. I am referring to Symbols and Signs by Vladimir Nabokov, which was written in 1948 and published in The New Yorker. I talked about Nabokov on this channel before when I did a video on Lolita. So I don't need to go into that great of detail. Just note that he was a writer who lived in the late 1800s and died in the mid to late 1900s. He was a Russian writer who was exiled from Russia after the revolution, and some of that comes up in his writings, and he found a place in Western Europe and America where he reported loving the liberal lifestyle. He especially liked, America's involvement in Vietnam, as well as Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon, which is not ideal given what we know about those people. It suggests a lot of weird sort of politics and whatnot. But that doesn't seem to have affected his writing. As we see in Lolita, he's very critical of authoritarian figures there, or at least individuals. He wrote a lot about individualism and collectivism and all kinds of things like that. And he was well regarded for his work. Lolita is considered one of the best books in literature in general, and I'm inclined to agree. So without further ado, let's talk about Symbols and Signs. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So Symbols and Signs focuses on a husband and wife duo. At the beginning of the story, they buy their son jellies for his birthday. However, they're not able to buy what they really want because their son is in an asylum because he has a mental health disorder called it's referential mania, or ideas of reference. Basically, he believes that everything is a reference to himself. Everything in the world exists to be a commentary on his own existence, which that's not the way things actually are. But he believes that to be the case, and they've had to put him into an asylum because it's negatively affected him and led to some self-harm and actions of suicide and whatnot. And his condition has been written about in a science magazine, so a lot of interest going on there. And then they decide to go to the asylum for his birthday to give him the jellies. It's a long trip to the asylum. The subway breaks down and they have to wait a long time for a bus. And when they get to the asylum, they find out that the son tried to kill himself. And so he's being held for being monitored. And so he can't have any visitors and they can't give him the jellies, and they decide to wait until the next visit to do so. And then there's another long trip home. The husband and wife kind of part at one point so she can get dinner ready, buy some food from the store. And as they go back to their tenement, they reflect on the dreadful life that they sort of live, being exiled from Russia and witnessing the Holocaust. And seeing that kind of take many of their family members. And then, being immigrants in America, things aren't really going well there, and their health is kind of poor. And again, their son is locked up in an asylum, so things aren't really going that great, and there's a lot of suffering going around. They do have the husband has a brother who they nicknamed the Prince because he has some money, but he does kind of lord that over them and make things more difficult for them in that way. And as they get ready for bed that night after eating dinner, the husband feels like he's dying. He feels not very happy at all. And he notes that he wants to bring the son home from the asylum because he doesn't want him to die in that asylum, I presume at least. And Yeah, so they kind of make plans for that, even though they think the brother won't really like that. And as the story comes to a close, they receive a series of phone calls. The first two are from a young girl, who's asking for a Charlie who doesn't seem to live there. And in the third phone call, we never actually find out what or who or what that is for. It's left up to the reader to kind of guess at, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, Nabokov provides us with quite a bit to think about here. One of the main ideas that he's writing about is that of the unfortunate life. The husband, wife, and son have lived a tragic life, very hard, very stressful, and a number of things have happened to them. They live in tenements, which at the time of that this was written, they were probably slums for immigrants in New York, which I think is where this takes place. So not very good living conditions, probably not getting their basic needs met there. They were exiled from Russia during the revolution, which is unfortunate. They're not able to access their homeland, or they just don't agree with the politics of that. There's the Holocaust that they dealt with. The aunt of the family died in that, and I think the son even witnessed it a little bit as he was 6 years old. Maybe he didn't retain a lot of memories, but maybe he did because it was a time of intense suffering. It was bound to have some sort of effect on him. And to make matters worse, the son is dealing with a mental illness. It does seem like maybe the family members, all of them are, with the husband and wife dealing with a little bit of depression because of their circumstances, but also what's happening to their son. So things aren't really good for the son either because he's dealing with the referential mania. He's trying to kill himself at various times, and he's probably in an asylum that isn't really being taken care of, being forgotten. It's understaffed, as they say in the story, so things really aren't going that well. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this, though. Here was Aunt Rosa, a fussy, angular, wild-eyed old lady who had lived in a tremulous world of bad news, bankruptcies, train accidents, and cancerous growths, until the Germans put her to death, together with all the people she had worried about. The boy, age 6, that was when he drew wonderful birds with human hands and feet, and suffered from insomnia like a grown-up man. And that's a very interesting quote because it just gets at the suffering that the boy dealt with, that the family dealt with, because family members dying in a Holocaust isn't ideal. But it also highlights the external circumstances in the family's life. Mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's often the product of the environment that you're placed in. And the son here is a product of his environment, witnessing the death of the Holocaust, and being forced to live in a tenement that might be a slum of some sort, and maybe not having all your needs met. That's bound to produce some negative mental health effects and force you to cope in strange ways. And so Nabokov is showing that this mental health is not born out of nothingness. Maybe the scientists might be confused by it, but it's very clear if you look at their lives that there's some reasoning behind it all. It doesn't make things better, but it does provide a sort of understanding of how mental health sort of affects people. And even then, like, Nabokov suggests that modern living is hard, that these struggles of being an immigrant in an unfamiliar country, and just like trying to get past all these wars and stuff. It's very hard on the people who are living in America, living in these places, and it can produce some negative mental health effects, even for the husband and wife who are probably dealing with depression or anxiety or something like that as they suffer in their tenement home and deal with the fact that their son is in a mental health institution. It's not ideal, and I like that Nabokov is showing this here. Nabokov also utilizes the mental health effect of referential mania in this story. The son's condition leads him to believe that everything refers to his existence. Nothing exists in a vacuum here. Everything that happens to the son, everything in the world, is a reference back to the son. It might be telling him he has to kill himself, or it might be filling him with illusions of grandeur. It's not ideal, and it just refers to his existence in some way. But Nabokov sort of uses that sort of thinking mindset and connects it back to the story. So essentially, the story is a giant reference to the son. It's a giant reference to his condition and how his parents feel about it. And so you could argue that maybe the story is sort of taking place in the mind or through the lens of the son's own perspective on the world. Given that their son is dealing with this condition, they can't help but view the world, or like view everything that happens to them is just a reference back to their son. And they ultimately want to get their son out of the asylum, so their lives are going to become even more ingrained in how their son is dealing with things. But so it's interesting how Nabokov writes a story. But you could ask, like, are the parents unhappy for other reasons? We're told that all of this is relating back to the son, but could it be a bunch of other things? Like the parents are dealing with their own issues, their own trauma, their own stressors in life, and the son is but one of them. And it's unfair to kind of view it through the lens of their son totally. Like you essentially lose the sort of consciousness of the parents in that way by viewing it only through the lens of the children. And I do think that's kind of true, but I don't know if Nabokov intended that, and even if he did, what was he really trying to say with that? Because is he trying to say that maybe the son isn't as important as we think it is? I don't know. I think I'm kind of missing the point there. And you could also argue that Nabokov wants you to feel this referential mania by filling the story with so many references to the son. You're beginning to understand maybe what the son is dealing with and how these conditions could have led to him, developing that mental health or mental illness, and what that could possibly mean for him. But I feel like it's kind of weak here as well, because you could do that if you had a couple of other characters or included the son as a perspective in the story. Currently, you only have the parents, and they're thinking about other things, so it's not as tightly wound as it could be. There's room for improvement in this sort of theme here. And the story is kind of brief, which I feel works here. Like in that brief time, we're only exposed to like what's going on with the family as it relates to the son. Like everything is definitely a giant reference, and if you make it longer, you might lose some of that. But again, I do think the story kind of suffers in not being a little bit longer, not fleshing out the other characters, or the not fleshing out like other perspectives, so that we can really get in the mindset of only thinking about the son. Like it kind of works here, but I think it could be even better ultimately. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Symbols and Signs by Vladimir Nabokov. A pretty solid short story, but I do think it could definitely be improved. Certainly at this point, not the best thing that I've read from Nabokov, but again, I'm comparing it against Lolita, and that's probably unfair. I do say that maybe Nabokov, like based on reading Lolita, maybe Nabokov only really works in a lengthy novel format. Maybe his short stories aren't as compelling. But again, saying that based on one short story is probably unfair. But again, you need something lengthy from Nabokov, and I'm willing to explore more of his writing. But maybe that's probably where I'm going to end up, with just saying that you need a novel to truly appreciate all that Nabokov has to offer. But again, that's me saying that after reading two of his things, so I'll let you kind of extrapolate from all of that. But yeah, if you read this story before, you have something to say about my review here, let me know in the comments below. We'd love to have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about this author if they don't already know, and this short story as well. Also, join the Discord if you want to have further conversations about it, and we can talk about other forms of media as well. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and self-referential travels. Farewell.